Uh, so what should we do? How should we get started? Do you want me to start asking you some questions? I know that we've had such wonderful conversations on the
Sure. Yeah, I
fly.
don't care. I'm ready.
Okay, so why don't you start by telling me how you got into um tell me your story about how you became a registered dietitian because I think it's such a great story.
Oh boy. Okay. So I became a registered dietitian, like a lot of dietitians, because I had a lot of issues with food and body. So when I went to school, I originally went to be a, police officer in criminal justice, something along those lines. I thought maybe forensics or fire science. Like, so I went to this very heavily criminal justice school.
And what was
And
at what point did you decide that route? Like, was that something you always wanted to do, or?
in high school, I really thought like that's what I wanted to do. I tried to get my parents on board with the Navy, and they shot that down. So they're like,
Really?
well, why don't you see what happens with school when you get your, letters, and then, go from there. Don't like just go out into war because they were afraid,
Right.
and I get it. Um, and then I got my letters to school, like for school acceptance, and I got accepted to John Jay in the city and University of New Haven, which is where I ended up going. Um, all set to study criminal justice, but somewhere in my high school, kind of track is where I was really trying to change my body. But that, you had asked me prior to this, like, when was the first time I ever, thought about my body, a negative way, or thought that I was too big. And that
Mm.
started very, very early on in life. Like, I can vividly remember when I was 7 years old going to visit my grandmother for, I used to stay with my grandmother like every summer. She lived in Long Island, so going to Jones Beach was like something that we would do. And
Hmm.
I remember my uncle openly like talking about my body size when I was 7 years old. And I wasn't a very, you know, large child. I was just, it was at that point where I was starting to put on, the pre-puberty weight. And he just thought it was very like okay to start talking about my body. And that was kind of like the first like seed that got planted. So I was very aware of my body from that point on. And I, started to continually gain weight from 7 years old on. And then when my grandmother, who was I was very close to, like around 10 years old, died, I started emotionally eating. I didn't know how to handle that.
Mm.
Um, and then about less than 3 years later, my dad died. And I didn't have any, way to kind of handle those feelings. So I
Yep.
turned to food as kind of my crutch. And as a result, I gained a lot of weight. And I went from being the chubby kid to the very, as they say, obese uh, child.
Which, which, just to interject, I feel like, so often when I hear about, emotional eating, especially eating with grief, and I certainly went through this with when my mom died, like, what, can we just take a moment to appreciate the fact that we can find an easy way to soothe ourselves with food? I mean, maybe there's long-term issues, but I just feel like, especially as a child, like bravo for finding ways to soothe and support yourself, like we always look at it as such a negative thing. And I just wanted to like take a minute to say like this, it's one way of soothing yourself. And it's so, obviously in society it's so problematic, but like I don't know. I just feel like I'm always proud of people who take care of themselves, even if, you know, even under the curtain of all the shame that comes with it. Like, can we just
Oh
take a
yeah,
moment and say like
absolutely.
this is a great way to support this is like a really great way to support yourself and good for you for finding ways to support yourself.
Yeah, when you're that young, you have no
Oh,
idea. I mean, like my mom
no.
did try to get us into some kind of like, I remember it like Parents Without Partners groups, but it was like the kids group, and tried to do the therapy
Mm,
thing when we were trying to go through that kind of grief. But the only real comfort I had was food. So, you know, I just continued to eat. And, you know, I wasn't a very active kid. I was a smart kid. I did the academic stuff, and I wasn't an athlete until later in life. So, you know, high school came, started thinking about career paths while all the while having all these underlying kind of hang-ups with food, and thinking my body wasn't good enough, and having family members continually interject on my body and tell me that it was wrong and too big. And um, you know,
I think,
I never did anything up until that
yeah.
point. I just kind of like took that information in and just felt really shameful about myself.
It
Um,
amazes me how often I hear that of adults just openly talking about children's body size. I mean, I feel like I don't have any memories of that at all. I have memories of listening to like my mother talking about how, how upset she was at her own body and looking at her and thinking, I don't see anything, like I don't see anything wrong.
mm,
Therefore, I must have a problem as well. Like internalizing other people's comments, but never actually having adults talk to me directly. And I just like it just, I don't know, it just boggles my mind when I hear how many people
yeah, it was
have
not helpful.
memories of that. Of course not.
um, yeah, so hearing all that and just kind of coupling that with being tormented by other kids and not really talking about it and how I was being treated because of my size. Um,
Really
yeah,
tormented and
I didn't really tell anybody that I was being bullied because of my size. Like I can still remember like in junior high school, in the middle of an English presentation, one of the boys saying like, "Why don't you go to Jenny Craig?" Like these are things that like
oh my goodness.
I didn't know what to do. Like I just, you know, I sucked it up and I continued on with my presentation. But I remember walking home that day and just being like beside myself, like crying. And the only thing I knew to do was just to keep on eating
Yeah, of
and
course.
silencing and, you know, stuffing down those feelings so that I wouldn't have to feel them in those moments. So, you know, all of this kind of led to my demise, I like to call it, but my rebuilding in a way. So high school came, and it came with
Yeah.
some more grief. My mom got diagnosed with MS at the time. At the same time, she told me that she was pregnant with my half brother from her new marriage. So it was a lot to deal with at 16 years old. So
Yeah.
when my mom, you know, was going through all her treatments and learning the best ways to care for herself, one of the doctors was like, "Hey, you know, there's not a whole lot of evidence, but you might find some relief from your disease with a vegetarian diet." So my mom's like, "Oh, I'm going to try this vegetarian diet because he thinks it'll help my MS symptoms." And I'm like, "Well, I'll do it with you. Like, I don't want you to be doing this alone." So here I go. This is the
Mhm.
first in, you know, kind of ever trying to modify my food intake. And it was at first, it was just, we didn't eat meat. And my mom lasted about 6 months and she's like, "I can't do this. I need a pork chop." And
Mhm.
I just continued on from then, like modifying and modifying because I started to see some changes in my body at that point by making those modifications to food. So there was a connection that was made for me from that experience. And, you know, prom was coming in the coming years, and I'm thinking about my future career in criminal justice at I think at my largest body size, I was still like what you would say a lower end larger body person. I
Mhm.
was just shy of 300 pounds, which is not a very big larger body. Um,
Were you
so,
getting comments from your family? Like, were
oh
people
yeah,
noticing and saying things? Because I feel like that was such a huge part of my younger motivation was just how much you get noticed and how many positive comments you
I
get.
think initially, like when I did the vegetarian thing with my mom, it was never about weight loss. It was all just like, "I'm going to support you." And then all of a sudden, when she gave up on it, I was like openly like, "Okay, prom is coming. I want to be a police officer of or something in this field, and I can't be inactive and I can't be this size, right? Because you can't be fit and fat." And protect people if you yourself are. I had this thought that I couldn't do it if I was a big person. So,
Right.
because every show I was watching at the time didn't support that kind of narrative.
Of course.
So I was like, okay, guys, I finally like openly said, like, I'm going to be like changing my diet. I want to lose weight. I need to do this. And everybody was supportive of this, like my
And you
family.
were how old? Were you like 16 or
16,
yeah.
probably, yeah, 16. It was my like junior year, I want to say, in high school.
Mhm.
And I did it. I was a success, and everybody kept, telling me how great I looked, and I was finally getting like validation, and I was being seen for the first time and not in a negative way. So, that was great. Like I got to feel what it was like to be like a normal kid and shop in regular, size clothing and buy the prom dress that was in the window of the store, on display. I used to walk past this when I was like in the heat of my like trying to lose weight. Like I would power walk from school past this dress store because I grew up in Brooklyn, and I would stare at this dress for like months on end. And I'm like, I'm going to fit in that dress and it's going to be a normal size. And that was like my big thing is like, I just want to wear this prom dress and have this
It
like
sounds
grand
it sounds
experience.
yeah, it sounds kind of like an 80s movie montage.
Exactly. It really was like, because, when you're a kid, you're in, growing up in like the 90s, you see all these great movies where it's like they have their big moment at the prom and the reveal, like she takes off her glasses and everybody knows she's beautiful,
Right.
when really she's been beautiful the whole time, but she just didn't know it. So yeah, I ended up losing weight. And I would say initially at first, like I really did try to be quote unquote healthy. Like I would spend my time in the library, my free periods, trying to read nutrition books and trying to read like how I was supposed to be eating in order to be a healthier person. But it just, after I got all that validation about my size changes, it was so clear to me that like that was more important than being healthy, right? Because
Hmm.
that's what everybody was noticing. So it just became, by the end of my senior year, it became very kind of challenging, my eating relationship, and I was exercising a lot. I had lost probably over 100 pounds by that point in a year's time, which, like, clinically, like what I know
Right.
now as a dietitian is malnutrition. Like, I
Yeah.
lost weight way too fast. It was, I was not eating enough calories, which I didn't know. I thought I was just doing what I needed to do, like slim fast at breakfast and or like oatmeal at breakfast, slim fast at lunch, and then boiled chicken and boiled potatoes at dinner was what I ate like every day in high school.
Mhm.
And I was being praised for it, and it was miserable.
Yeah.
So here I am. I accepted, to go to college, and I just got over this huge like weight loss, and I'm like, oh God, everybody's saying when you go to college, you gain weight. You go and you gain weight. So I was terrified when I went off to college, and it became my whole focus was like not gaining weight, and like every thought that I had, it was not about like enjoying the college experience. It was like my body, my size, I have to keep it down because this is the way that people accept me. And if I'm starting fresh in this new place, I only want them to know me at this size. I don't want to feel all that pain that I felt in high school and junior high school as a bigger person.
Mhm.
So I probably did about a semester of criminal justice and forensics. And then probably by 6 months in, I was finding myself in the culinary program. And I was like, I want to cook because I love food, because I think about food all the time because I'm not eating it, right? That's what was
Yeah.
happening. I was just like, I want food. Like, I can think of all these fabulous dishes, and I was saving recipes and collecting things of all these things that I would never try, right? So I switched majors to culinary arts. And then after I did a semester of it, they dropped the program. They got rid of it. I guess there wasn't enough like interest in it. So I was like, okay, I'm in this culinary program. they have this nutrition program, and I love nutrition. I read about it all the time.
Mm.
So that was how I ended up in nutrition. Knew nothing about what becoming a dietitian would mean, like the whole internship process. I thought it was after 4 years, you're a dietitian and you help people lose weight, and that's what a dietitian does. And that's not what a dietitian does, but that's how I became a dietitian ultimately. My own
I
mess
think
with
that's what
food.
most people think a dietitian does, and I
Well,
think most people think I'm going to go to a dietitian and that my dietitian is going to help me lose weight. I mean, I think that's
yeah.
really
And that
what.
and that, to be honest, like my whole, you know, entrance into dietetics and my schooling, it was very weight centric
Mhm.
focus. Like it's changing now. Like I've seen a lot of changes in curriculum, but for the most part, like it's very heavily focused on the BMI and making, weight change, the main focus. I mean, we have the word diet in our title. So I'm assuming people would think that it's all about weight loss. And, since I had that, I did it, so I can help others people do it too. Not realizing just how messed up my relationship was. I just thought that that's really how it had to be if I wanted to maintain that kind of a weight loss. So yeah, college was probably the hardest part of my life. My healthy eating kind of like obsession uh, got me into probably started off with orthorexia, which is an unhealthy obsession with just like eating very cleanly and purely and healthfully. Um, then I went through more periods of anorexia. I guess I would say I was more anorexic in high school, but didn't really know it. And then after, years of starving yourself, naturally you're one day going to turn to food. And I did turn to food, and it turned into um, binge eating and eventually bulimia, which was, my eating disorder was never something that was constant in my life, because in the back of my head, I knew what I was doing was wrong and not good for me. Like, because I did do a lot of, reading, and I was in a nutrition program, and I knew, I was learning that what I was doing was not healthful. So it didn't stay in my life, but because of all the trauma that I experienced earlier in my life, um, you know, when I had to feel hard emotions, my eating disorders were what I turned to manage them. I didn't have any other coping mechanisms to manage those feelings. So, when hard things came up, it was never like, let's find a solution to this hard thing. It's like, let's focus on changing my body because I can
Right.
control that. And, it's everything will be fine if I'm the right size and I have the perfect body and, my macros are on point. It was never like, it never occurred to me that that wasn't the problem that needed to be fixed.
Hmm.
It was always something else, but it gave me something to focus on. So,
Right. Absolutely.
you know, um, I'd say probably 6 months out of every year, my eating disorder would kind of like surface and hit me. Like I'd be in these periods of recovery, and then I'd fall back hard because I could never get over the weight gain part,
Hmm.
which was the hardest part for me. When you live in a body that is not meant for you. I was very weight restricted at those times. Um, it's hard to eat regularly and acknowledge that you're going to gain weight, when the only positive reinforcement you've received in your life is because
Right.
you're at a smaller size. So,
Oh yeah, it's terrifying. It's
oh,
probably the single most terrifying part of leaving dieting,
oh
I
yeah,
think.
absolutely. It's what kept me stuck for so long. So, after college, what was I, like 20, 21, right? You're 21 when you graduate college. So from like
Well,
21 to, when did I have Nico? Let's see. I don't know, in my 30s, I was on again, off again with all these. I would try every diet. Like I was a dietitian at this point, trying all these crazy
mhm.
things, like to do anything to, shrink myself. And, it just wasn't worth it. And after I had Nico, my first son, um, I suffered like tremendous postpartum depression, and couple that with a changing body, and I was like this perfect storm. And my eating disorder, after I had like been through a really long period without it, came back, and it came back with a vengeance. And that it was so bad that I wanted to kill myself. And that was the real turning point for me in my whole like letting go of dieting journey, was just like I wanted to stop living because of the way my body looked. Like I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to be in this world anymore. Like I had a baby, I have a husband, like I have family, like, but I just was so wrapped up in all the diet culture stuff and messaging that I got along the way, that I was just so broken. And I remember being like on the floor, I'm downstairs right now. So upstairs on my couch, just like crying. And my husband, like, what is going on? Like, like, you can't. At that point, my husband was like the only person who knew about my food struggles. And I was so ashamed, by that point, because like I felt like I'm a dietitian, I'm supposed to have it together. Like, what will people think if I have to
Yeah.
admit that I need help? And it was that very next day that I got myself into an intensive outpatient program for eating disorders. And I did probably about a year of, you know, recovery, basically. I was working part time, I was a mom now, and I was driving an hour away because in our area, there's no eating disorder, program. So I drove an hour 3 days a week to do an intensive outpatient program to get help. And that's when I was introduced to intuitive eating. It kind of came at the end of my recovery journey. A therapist kind of just like mentioned, like, hey, you're a dietitian. Have you ever heard of this? And I was just like, I don't know. I don't know if it was the right thing for this therapist to kind of like mention, but it kind of led me down a rabbit hole. And I was like, oh, well, and I kept finding all these different things about it.
So
Um,
had
I
so wait,
got the
had you heard of
intuitive
it?
eating book. I,
Like, isn't it? Had you heard of
huh?
it?
I had never
Is
heard of it
had you heard of it? Like, is
until
intuitive eating not even something that would have been mentioned in your curriculum?
in my undergraduate, it wasn't, but there was like a lapse of time. So, um, when you're dealing with an eating disorder, it's really hard to get through school and work and everything.
Yeah.
So I actually took time off right after, you know, oh, I lost you. There you go. Right after, school had finished, because I had to work. I didn't realize the whole internship process like cost like 20 grand to go be a dietitian, you know. So I took some time off, and I didn't go back for my RD till years later when, things were a little bit better.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
so at that time, I would say there was no traction on intuitive eating. Like the book was out, but it wasn't as big. It didn't have yet get co-opted by diet culture. So
Right.
it wasn't something you heard about as much. So yeah, no, I actually, I'm finishing my master's now, and I see it in the curriculum, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Granted, it was an eating disorder course, but it was there, and it wasn't there when I was going through initially. So when was that? Like in the early like 2000,
Right.
2005 is when I was like school for my undergrad. So it wasn't really as prevalent as it is right now.
Mhm.
So when they mentioned that, I was like, oh, let me go see what that's about. And even though I was in recovery, things still weren't like great for me with my food relationship. Like I said, like I really struggled with the idea of like gaining weight and restoring my body to its like natural size. I got myself a copy of the intuitive eating book, and I actually ended up donating it, my first copy. I couldn't get on board with some of the principles, like blew my mind. I had gotten that book and Body Respect, and they were both.
Oh, well, that's pretty radical.
I was like, what is happening in my life? Like this is garbage. Like I
Really?
couldn't even, like, I wasn't ready for that stuff. So I ended up donating those. I
See,
had
I
listened.
felt. I felt like before I read Body Respect, the first sort of, what felt like an absolute, 180 from anything I had ever heard before was when I read Health at Every Size. And that was just, I still thought I'm going to help at every size my way to weight loss. Like, like I felt like I could still make it work, like I was like, oh, every always about how am I going to get my life. Every time I read a Janine Roth book, or like anytime I read anything that was all about like letting go, and I was like, I'm going to intuitive eat my way to weight loss. Like it was always, that's how I viewed them all. So I sort of found them like, oh, this is so refreshing and seems much easier than, counting points or or
Yeah.
calories. But at the same time, like I still sort of felt like the end goal was always weight loss.
When I read those books, I feel like it might have been like a later edition. Had it definitely wasn't the first edition, I think, the book that I read. So like at that point they were very clear that it wasn't like about weight loss. So I was like, well, this is garbage. I'm like, well, what is this gonna do for me? I think I was very much the person who needed a plan. Like I needed to have the workout book, and I needed to have the diet plan, and I needed to know what I was gonna eat every single day. And if it didn't have the calorie counts on it, I like it was so hard for me to let go of calorie counting and just serving sizes, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, when I finally was ready, it took about another year after before I was like I was just listening to podcasts and coming around to these, and just really like it got to the point where I was like, well, how do I really want to live the rest of my life? Do I want to be here for my son? Do I want to be present? Like it was just taking so much time away from me, and you know, I didn't want to waste any more time with my son anymore, and I knew that I wanted to have an even bigger family, and it was just getting in the way. So I was like, I'm going to embrace this, and I gave the book another try, and I started following more people and having conversations, and it really started to click for me when I was working as a dietitian for ShopRite, and this is all like a couple months after, going through my program, for recovery. And I was seeing a lot of the same people, and they were coming in and they would step on the scale and they would just feel so bad about themselves. Like if it didn't go, the way they wanted. And it just, I would see the shame on the clients that I was working with. And, it was like everything I was feeling was being mirrored back to me. And I was seeing
Mm,
their pain, and I was seeing my own pain through them. And it just, I knew that it wasn't the way to go anymore, that, pursuing weight loss, some people can pursue weight loss and be perfectly fine, right? Even knowing that they're going to gain the weight back, like they don't have to, worry about, developing an eating disorder or being obsessive about it. Like if they gain weight back, they don't think about it. But for people like, myself and like we can't go that route. And I think, intuitive eating can work for everybody, but I think it's really going to help a person who, um, has these very, black and white thoughts about food and nutrition and exercise. And it can really give them back their lives. And that's what it did for me. And that's what I hope that it will continue to do for every person that I work with. And, that's why I continue on this path, because there's so much more to life than worrying about what you weigh.
right. Yeah. So
So
now
that
you
was a
mentioned,
really long story about how I became a dietitian. I'm so sorry.
no, I think it's fascinating. I'm so glad you shared. And I wonder, going back to wanting to be in the military, I find it interesting because I certainly felt like, there were many times where very fleeting. It's not anything I ever like um, pursued, but often wanting to go, feeling like if I were to enlist in the military, that would solve all of my problems because that would have, the regimen and the exercise and all of that. Like I wonder if that was what
I think
interest into you
that
in
was
the
part
AV?
of it. I think the other part of it was like I come from a military family.
Mm.
A lot
Yeah,
of
see, I do not have.
my uncles were, all Navy and Marines, and um, oddly enough, my father wasn't. But it's just always something that I
I
thought
wanted to
I would,
check in
be a good fit
with
for.
police
And
too. Like there.
you froze on me.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if it's me. If
Sorry, you
I'm.
froze on me. I didn't hear you.
I know. I was just gonna say, like, I also had fleeting moments of wanting to be a cop, and always kind of said throughout my life, like, if I hadn't been a journalist, like, the one thing I always thought I would be a cop. And I'm curious, like, I wonder if there's something, if it's
That's so
the
funny.
it's that regimented lifestyle, like when you feel out of control, sometimes you turn to food, and food is something you can control. But then wouldn't it be nice to just kind of give your life up to something else that takes over? Like when I think of the military, I think of like drills and alarm, getting up at a certain time and just like having your whole life taken over so that you're just like, I'm no longer at the wheel. It can
Yeah,
feel so good when you're feeling like your life is so out of control.
I don't know. I definitely, it's hard to remember because it is so long ago, but I'm sure
Mm.
the whole like, when you go to boot camp, you get in great shape kind of thing was a factor. But I think more at that time, I didn't want to feel what was going on in my mom was getting sicker by the day, and I didn't want to see it. I was kind of running away from
Yeah.
everything. Um, so I think that was part of it. I just wanted to get away, get out.
Mm, interesting.
But control for me was always a big thing. So yeah, that was there too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge, I think puberty and having children are kind of the two biggest moments in women's lives when they turn to food control, and my life is out of control, my body is out of control, I don't recognize it, I don't want it to look this way, what is happening? How can I feel a little bit more in control? Counting my calories, or um, feeling, just that feeling of cutting back and feeling hunger, and maybe even just again all of the guilt that is associated with eating for comfort. That is something that we are so good at doing, and our bodies are so good at using, allowing food to comfort ourselves, and that it is like a really smart, intuitive tool to use when you're in times of confusion and grief.
Oh
But
yeah.
then with it comes all of the guilt that and all of the shame of the fear of weight gain.
Yes, this is the
Um,
biggest hurdle I feel like for a lot of people in letting go of dieting.
yeah, I know. So you mentioned podcasts too. I want to find out what podcasts were, since we are starting a podcast as well, and since
Um,
podcasts were so huge in my own recovery,
there
what were
were
some of
so
the ones that
many.
helped you?
Um, I did listen to a lot of eating disorder podcasts in the very beginning, like Recovery Warriors, and then I stumbled upon the Christy Harris, and I think the first um, episode I heard was with, oh God, I can't think of the name. You Isabel Fox
Oh,
and
Isabel
Duke.
Fox and Duke. Yes.
And that was one of those moments where I was like, I'm not ready for this. And I was like, I had
Mm.
subscribed for Christy Harris's like podcast like earlier that week. And then I listened to Isabel Fox and Duke, and I was like, oh, this is too much for me. Like this is like a whole big like thing.
Yeah.
This is a movement. Like this is beyond me. Like this is not what I need. And I was like, delete. And then I kept finding myself like going back. I was like, dieting doesn't work. This I have to like keep digging with this. Like, and I kept finding myself going back and resubscribing to different podcasts. But like, it was so funny to just like fight it the whole way. Like I fought it.
Yeah.
I wasn't embracing it at all.
Her interviews are always so great too. She just tells her story so well. And I always think of like when she talks about like digging her nails into dieting, and just feeling like she was hanging on for dear life with this idea of and constantly falling off the wagon. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest struggles that so many of us at least for, for me, a lot of my like at the end of my rope feeling with dieting was when I felt so out of control with binge eating.
Oh yeah,
and
it
and
takes a
and
toll.
that feeling, where it just became this constant daily cycle of like binge eating at night, going to bed feeling like I was a terrible human being and I had no control, and tomorrow was going to be a new day and everything was going to be great, and starting off the day basically starving myself through the day because I knew the binge would come. But how it just like became this tight, the cycle, the spiral of shame just become tighter and tighter and tighter. um
And for you, did that,
and
I don't know if you've ever explained your backstory. Did that come in direct response to Weight Watchers, or did this happen before?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I certainly, I talk about in my book the very first diet I ever went on. I was 14, which is sort of like right on track. I was, puberty had hit, and I had a very, very skinny mom who always talked about how fat she was. And I did not have her body type. I was always built like, I was big boned, and, I was like my father's side of the family, and they always talked about my broad shoulders and all of these things that no girl wants to hear, how you're so sturdy. And then all of a sudden it was like my breasts grew. Like my mother had, always talked about how she had barely had any, barely had an A cup.
Mm,
And so everything that she was, I felt like the opposite. And so again, it was like, here she was talking about how fat she was because she was going through menopause right around the same time, or entering menopause right around the same time that I was entering puberty. So her body was changing too. And that's another big time. And, listening to her always disparaging herself, never talking about me directly, but me, internalizing that, thinking, well, she's tiny, she's smaller than I am. So obviously, if she thinks she's fat, what am I? And
right.
so and that was kind of a bonding thing for us. We would go on diets together. My first diet was the Slim Fast shakes when I was 14, and we went on them together. And that was kind of our like, yeah, let's do this.
Yep.
But I never really felt obsessive about any of it. I just sort of felt like I was bad at it. I just felt like I couldn't keep any, I was like your mom. I was like, I can't stick with it. Like I just felt like a failure at dieting. I was like, nah, it's not worth it. And I never had a lot riding on it. I never felt, I never felt like my size. I mean, I was very uncomfortable with my size, and I hated bathing suits and wore baggy clothes and all of that. But I never felt like I was ridiculed, or that it really sort of interfered with my social life as a teenager, whatever that meant. I mean, I definitely wasn't a cheerleader. I was more of the like combat boots, pothead teenager. That was the crowd I ran with. We didn't have cheerleaders in my. I went to like a performing arts high school, so there were no cheerleaders or football players in my high school, thank God. But even just through my young adult life, I just sort of always would go on diets, and but then I was terrible and fail at them and never could keep them up, and my weight would fluctuate, but never in anything extreme. And then it wasn't until Weight Watchers, which I went to after I had my second baby, and I had a friend who had lost a tremendous. I mean, I had always known people who had gone to Weight Watchers, but I was always sort of like, I'm not going to pay for a weight loss program. I'm going to be able to do this on my own, and I'm going to find, and then iPhones came out, and there was all the like the Lose It app and the
Mm,
My Fitness Pal app. So I was always like trying free programs and never really sticking with them. But then I had a friend who lost a tremendous amount of weight in Weight Watchers, and after my son was born, he was like 8 months, and I decided I wanted my body back. Women
mm.
always say that. Drives me crazy when I hear that, but where did it go? It didn't go anywhere. It's still right there. But that's when I was sort of like, oh, I'll give it a try. And, there was the local chapter in Rosendale. And that was the first time that I was sort of, I think it's, the combination of the meetings and paying for it and all of the, there was just so much motivation that I just was like, I felt like I was on fire. Like I felt like this was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And that I was working this program and points and everything was so great. And I also lost a tremendous amount of weight in a relatively short period of time. And so everybody around me was suddenly commenting about how healthy I looked and how happy I looked. And oh my God, this is so great. And then it was,
Mm.
you know, the positive affirmation was so overwhelming. And I was at a position like we just moved from Brooklyn to Rosendale when I was pregnant with my second child. So I didn't have any family or friends around me. Like this was sort of like, I talk about in my book how it was church because you went every week and it was always the same people and it was like it was a community for me. So it was like so much more in there was so much support and love and it was such a wonderful place at that time in my life. And so of course I wanted to become a leader. You know, I just felt like I wanted to show everybody how wonderful this program was and how wonderful and how great it was for me. And like I just felt like um, I, you know, wanted to help everybody get to where I was. And I remember going for my interview as a leader, and I just like it should have been a red flag at that point. Um, just, you know, going to this place and applying because you know you have an interview as a leader and I guess they basically have to size you up and look and see how much weight you lost if it was enough. I don't know what they were looking for, but they asked me like, do you have any retail experience, which was just sort of funny because I had shown up with like, you know, I had been a journalist working at newspapers for 20 years, and so I had that's my what my resume looked like. And so I like show up with my resume and they were like, did you have any retail experience? And I was like, well, yeah, like in high school, I guess. Uh, but it was just such like a different world for me to get there. And then, you know, suddenly I was standing in front of this room full of people and I was like, I felt like I was doing stand up, you know, like every week I was up there and I was talking and I was leading this room and everybody was loving it and it was so fun and it was just like I just felt like this was my calling, you know. Um, I just absolutely loved it and it was sort of, you know, for the first like 3 months, everything was great. And you know, the other reason why I wanted to be a leader was because they literally would, you know, you weigh in and you have to like send in your monthly weight to corporate, and I thought that was
Really?
like, yeah. And so I was like, I thought that that would be a really great motivator for me to stay on track and
Oh boy, that's a
not
lot of
to let
pressure.
loose. I know, but I was like, that's the kind of pressure I need because I've been such a failure my whole life. I've never, you know, losing weight isn't the problem. It was keeping it off that was the problem. And so after like 2 or 3 months, the weight started to creep back, and that's when I started freaking out because you know, I'm standing up there telling all these people about how this program is working, and suddenly I can't do it anymore. And what's wrong with me? And I'm such a failure. And, you know,
And you
programs
were
like
still sticking to your points plan and all that
I
by
was
that point?
trying. I mean, I was thinking, you know, in I couldn't stick to it just because there was so much internal resistance, you know, because it's so to that rigidness. And I thought that I couldn't stick to it because I was a failure and that I was just lazy and that I wasn't, you know,
Mm.
if I really needed to like buckle down. Um, and I, you know, at that time I didn't realize what was actually happening was that like my body was kind of rebelling and my brain was having enough of it, you know, all of this stuff that like I now see as the sort of alternative viewpoint of how your body reacts and how it tries to achieve homeostasis after a lengthy, you know, after like more than a year of starving myself, like you had said, you
Yeah.
know, like I was in a state of starvation and my body was finally saying it had enough and it was tired and it was, and so I stopped following these points, or I would follow the points throughout the day, but then at the end of the day, I would start binge eating.
You're starving.
And I know exactly. And so, but you know, I was thinking like, oh, I'm such a hypocrite because I'm telling everybody how great this program is, and now I can't do it anymore. And then Weight Watchers is going to fire me. Like I was so wound up and so frustrated with the fact that I couldn't do it anymore. And you know, felt I spent like 2 years like that in that state of just like constantly battling, trying to get back down to that weight I had once been at when everything was so great. And how can I get back to there? And oh, I'm binging again, and oh, everything is terrible. And I, you know, like it was. I spent 2 years of that and just trying so hard to use all of the the tactics that they teach you in programs like Weight Watchers. And, it's just so funny of how this programs like this, when you are successful, it's all because of the program. But when you're a failure, it's all because of you,
Oh
and they
yeah,
set
you're
that up.
flawed.
You're the failure. It's not the program that's the problem. You're just not working the program, and so it was finally I decided after like a really bad binge. I think it was even New Year's Eve was this really bad binge. I decided I needed to cure the binge eating, which I think is actually a lot of people. That's where you sort of feel like, oh, if I can just get this binge eating under control, my whole day is great.
Yeah.
Everything, everything is great. I'm eating salads and sticking to the plan. It's just that at night everything goes away. So if I can figure out how to stop the binge eating, then everything will be wonderful. And so that's how I ended up getting into. I think I literally like typed in binge eating into the search bar for podcasts, and I discovered a guy named Alan Standish who had a podcast about his own journey with binge eating. And I was looking for it the other day because I was thinking about him, and it's not on. I can't find it anymore. I think it was interesting because he sort of had moved on from talking about binge eating to talking about progress, not perfection. I think he ended up changing the name of his podcast, but anyway, he was great. He introduced me to so many different guests that then I would listen to I would binge their podcasts after I would, I found out like he had interviewed Katie Dalebout. I don't know if you ever came upon her. She had a podcast. It's now called Let It Out, but it was called something else when I first started listening to her. And it was through her that I discovered Linda Bacon. She had interviewed Linda
Yeah.
Bacon, and that's when I was like, oh, she was just so amazing to listen to, and so I read Health at Every Size. But I was still a Weight Watchers leader at this point too, trying to figure because I was
Oh,
desperately trying to sort of use outside resources to help me figure out how to get this all right, and maybe I could help the other Weight Watchers members if I could figure this all out. Um, and was still trying yeah I was still trying to use I was listening to these podcasts obsessively. um Summer Inanen was another one. I listened to her a lot. I don't know
yeah,
if you
she
ever
was a
listened to
good one.
her. And then Christy Harrison, of course. When I discovered her, I also binged through all of her early seasons. And so I was listening to it a lot, but I was sort of feeling like if I just keep listening to it, maybe it'll stick, But I was having such a hard time internalizing it for another year. And then it was when my mother was sick. She had lung cancer and had gotten better, but then it returned and had metastasized in her brain and her spine, and it was that when I just sort of lost where I was like, that was my breaking point, where I was like, I don't have the mental energy to care about this stuff right now. I'm just gonna have to like take a break. And plus she was up in Toronto and I was down here in Rosendale, so it was like I was driving up there all the time, and it was just these long drives, and I was just like, I need a break. So I left. That was when I left Weight Watchers. But I had also decided I was going to become this health coach, and still was all very much focused on weight loss, even though I was listening to all of this for a long time. I was still seeing my first clients, I was still talking about weight loss, and I was all about like whole foods. I was deep into orthorexia, and
Yeah.
everything was organic. Everything had to be farm raised, pasture raised. Maca powder and goji
Oh
berries,
yeah, I
and
went
like
through that
my
phase.
all of my smoothies with 8,000 different capsules, and
Supplements. Yep.
yeah. Um, so, I went through all of that, still feeling like I was going to find the secret. Um, and I don't really like, I don't know when I finally kind of just gave up. I think it was really, again, like just living that life enough, and being so terrified of the weight gain. But you know what I think it was, actually, now that I think about it, I think what changed for me was changing my Instagram feed, changing my social media feed, because originally Instagram for me was all food and like Fitspo, and it was
Mm,
all so it was all thin bodies and food. And I think I just like had been recommended, I think maybe it was like Reagan Chastain, or I was listening to an interview with somebody where they were talking about like no, it was Dietitians Unplugged. It was
okay.
Glennis Oyston.
I love
Austin?
her.
Oyston? Yeah.
Royston,
And
yes.
she and Erin Flores were talking about curating your Instagram feed. And I was like, and she said, just go to my Instagram feed and just follow everybody I follow. And I was like, okay. So I did, I
I
just
can do
started
that.
going like every single account. And, just that idea of like every single account, if it makes you feel bad about yourself to look at this picture, just unfollow them. And I started really actively curating my Instagram feed, and I started following larger bodied people, larger bodied influencers. I got rid of anytime somebody posted any kind of like smoothie bowl or anything that felt like weird, obsessive uh,
Delete.
food, I would just be like unfollow, and really just started. And I think that was really seeing more body, just seeing more women's bodies of different sizes was, I think, really what did it for
And
me.
living their
Like I
lives.
really, and living their lives and being happy and being, just seeing them. I think it was just amazing to me how little I allowed myself to see bodies in a positive way. And I think that was really what kind of helped me let go of of my own fears of how living this free food freedom lifestyle was going to just um, desperately wanting it, but also desperately fearing the weight gain. But then
Oh
seeing
yeah.
that there were so many beautiful, incredible women out there, and so many different bodies, and so many different sizes and colors and shapes, and like it just, I think that was what really did it for me, where I could really start thinking about myself in a positive light, thinking about my own body in a positive light.
Definitely.
Um, yeah. So, and I think, yeah, I mean, I think that was what like would be my number one advice to anybody who
Oh yeah, that's huge,
is
definitely.
is to really just stop exposing yourself to Fitspo. Like just get rid of it. It's so unhealthy. Um, yeah. So
I know it's
anyway,
like it's like an unpouring of your soul.
I know, right? It is. It is incredible. But so let's it's been almost an hour. So let's talk about this podcast, because I want to have, I want to talk about what we want to accomplish. We talked briefly about it. Uh, what do we want to do? I just feel like podcasts were so instrumental for me in terms of that message and
I don't know. I think it. Oh yes. What do I want to accomplish? I just want to, you know, give people who may be on the fence about letting go of dieting something, some useful information and positive information that there is, you know, available and out there. And there's another way, there's another approach to health that doesn't involve, you know, constantly looking at the numbers and scale and, you know, that there's just so much more to life, you know. I
hmm
think it's Hello Body really is a reintroduction to your own body as you show up in
hmm
this world, regardless of, you know, whether it's fat or thin. It's about being able to listen to your own inner voice and what's important to you and what you value, not what society and mainstream media is telling you is important. You know, it's really helping you find you. And that's what I hope people find because I'm much happier now in my body, even though I'm not at the lowest weight I've ever been. And I have my life back. And I hope that other people can find theirs. What
Yeah.
about you?
I love that. I mean, I think, yeah, I think what I think of when I think of the term hello body is, like you said, just letting your body have a voice. And I think that has been such an important part of my own personal journey, which is like reminding myself constantly that my brain is just like one small, that inner narrative, that negative voice, whatever, like it's just such a small part of who I am, that there's like this huge other part of me that is my organs and my heart and my gut and all of this other wisdom and all of this other stuff that is going on that I really like can take time to appreciate. And I think getting out of the brain and getting into the physical body and appreciating your muscles and your joints and the skeleton and the blood flow, like all of that stuff that you just never take any time to think about during the day. Like it's like exercising
Right.
a muscle, getting into that and thinking about that and just and acknowledging that there's so much more to you that is beyond, what you're seeing in the mirror and how you're viewing yourself in that narrative. And that voice in your brain, which is actually really unreliable. I think that our own inner narrator is one of the most unreliable centers of intelligence we have. When you think of how intelligent your heart and your gut can be in situations and guiding you through life. So kind of
100%.
amplifying the rest of you, the physical self, as a way to at least start to have gratitude for who you are in your body and how, and like you said, how you show up in this world, that there's just one of us, there's just one, this is all we get.